out there. We will give a few moments so that people can log on, because if they're anything like me, I have to find the code, then I have to remember what I got to press, and I have to remember what I have to do when I pressed and having found things. So we will give a few moments, but welcome to those of you who are already with us on Zoom, if not in body. My name is Martin Palmer, and I'll be kicking off this in a few moments. And I know we've got quite a lot of you who've already made commitments, some very dear and beloved old friends out there as well. So we look forward to a very good interactive session. And just to encourage you, while we're waiting for the sort of the final tally to grow, do use the Q&A for putting up comments, but also for questions. There will be a couple of occasions for Q&A, so please do use those fully. Okay, let us get starting then. So thank you for joining us. My name is Martin Palmer. I am the acting CEO of FaithInvest, one of the three bodies behind launching this new round of Faith long-term plans. And I was in charge of the last lot that we did back in 2008, 2009, when I was the Secretary General of the Alliance of Religions and Conservation. And it is wonderful to have you joining us, old friends, those who've already done plans before, those of you who've made commitments to do plans this time, and those of you who are looking in to see whether this might be something that you would like to do. And we very much hope at the end that you will, and that you will support this in whatever way and become involved in whatever way. The colleagues who join me today are Alison Prout, who is the director of the International Network on Conservation and Religion, and who has been driving, along with Nana Francois, who is our membership secretary for, director of membership for FaithInvest, have been very much driving the design of the guide that I hope you've all had. And Susie Weldon, who is FaithInvest communications officer, will be overseeing and helping us get through this. And then we're especially delighted to have a very beloved old friend, Gopal Patel, who runs the Bhumi Global, which he will be telling you about. And Gopal is very much a fruit from the first round of the projects, and would not be doing what he is doing now, which is multifaceted. I think it would be fair to say, Gopal, if it hadn't been for the Hindu long-term plan. So we look forward very much to Gopal telling us, how it worked, the things that didn't work, the things that did work, and where we've ended up. But it is a great pleasure to have you with us. What are the Faith long-term plans? Essentially, this is about the role of faiths as stakeholders. One of the things that I discovered many years ago when producing the very first Atlas of Religion, a sort of mapping of what the religions owned and ran and influenced and so forth, was the degree to which the major faiths genuinely did not know what they owned, what they ran. They didn't, often in many cases, they didn't know how many schools they had or how many hospitals they had. It's estimated that 50% of schools around the world have a link with religions or are actually run by religions. Give a very simple example. In Indonesia, there are 80,000 Islamic boarding schools which provide the bulk of education for rural children. Without them, there would be no education in the rural areas, all run by the local mosques and by the Muslim Union. We run, as faiths, about 1/3 of all hospitals and clinics worldwide. And in the COVID crisis, our role has been absolutely invaluable. The Church of England has just published a report saying that there is a serious threat to the £12.5 billion of civil society support that the church gives at every level in terms of welfare, kindergartens, homes for the elderly, schools, etc. So we are stakeholders of the planet. We are, in terms of investments, one of the largest and certainly the most value-driven group of investors in the world. And FaithInvest exists precisely to help the faiths move their investments into proactive investing. We've had a long tradition of faiths of what we won't invest in, a very honourable history of that. We have a long history too of shareholder motion, of voting down things or raising issues. But another part of the journey is then to say, well, having having engaged in that, where do we now put our money so that we literally invest in the world that we want to see? And that's a very powerful element that Nana will be speaking to later on. I think the other issue too is that we need to find out what we own. We recently had a very interesting phone call from the Church of England. I'm an Anglican, and the Church of England is the third estate of Parliament. It is fairly well governed. That they rang us to say they just discovered that they got 100,000 hectares of forestry. Did we know anybody who could help them design what to do with it? Well, when you get a group that large that thinks it knows what it's doing, still not really knowing what it had got, that raises big questions. So part of this whole project is for us to, as faiths, as members of faiths, as people running faiths, to go deep and to say, do we know what we own? Do we know what we run? Do we know how many media we have? Do we know how many radio stations or television stations we have? How many websites are we running? Just to get some sense of the scale of what we are actually running and managing on the planet. We are major stakeholders. But there is also a need for that knowledge to then be turned into, so what can we do with this to address environmental and sustainable issues, particularly as we head towards the end of the SDGs to 2030. So there is an enormous amount of work to be done. And what we're interested in is not so much the faith leaders who will pontificate on this and say what other people should do, but much more that we find out what we each as faiths have, and we talk about how we can use that to literally build the world we want to see, rather than, as has tended to be the habit in the past, to point to other people and say, why don't you do this? We think it would be a good idea. We won't actually do it ourselves, but we'd love it if you would. We've got to move beyond that stage. That was a very inadequate and frankly a rather infantile stage. And this is really taking us beyond that. It is saying, let us stop pretending we do not influence the planet and people. We do. And that's the heart of this. And obviously, one of the aspects of the Faith Long-Term Plans is that as we begin to discover what people are wanting to do, we can partner people with other faiths. As you'll see later in the presentation that Alison and I will do, there are partnerships already out there to ensure that when you come up with plans, they are really helpful, useful, practical, as well as inspired and ambitious. So that really is the goal of what we aim to do. We want also to put this in the theological context. We're doing this not because we own things, but because of our understanding of what we are called by whatever language we use, God, Allah, the Buddha, the Tao, the divine. We are here for a purpose. We are a purposeful people in that sense. We are people who see meaning behind things. And it is our role theologically to respond to the crises, not by just simply coming up with a quick salve, a 3-year campaign to save this or save that, but actually to delve much deeper. We know, all our faiths know, that we are a narrative species. We tell stories. That's how we've passed on our great teachings. Nobody was ever converted by a pie chart. We're converted by stories. We're changed by stories. We know that if you want to change people, you need to engage them, not frighten them, not scare them off. And part of this is a building on something that many of us have been involved with called Celebration Earth, which is actually saying, you know, if something is worth saving, it's usually worth celebrating. And if something is worth celebrating, it's usually worth saving as a counter blast, as it were, an antidote to the tendency within many of the more earnest groups of telling us that it's all our fault, that we're all wicked, we're all sinful, we're all going to hell in a handcart. That doesn't help. We as religions have tried that in the past. Many of us have. It does not work. It disempowers people. So Faith Long-Term Plans is about celebrating the fact that we can change the planet if we want to. We can change how people behave because we've done it for thousands of years. And these are strengths that no other group has. And as Alison will explore with us later as well, we also know how to celebrate, a very important element of actually being positive, but we will come and explore that later. We're hoping that for those of you who have made a commitment, that this will be an enormously helpful session. but we are also planning a series of webinars, which Alison again will introduce us to later, which you can find on the FaithInvest website, which will take you deeper into the main areas of activity. We are also here to help you in whatever way we can, to enable you to develop programs and plans, and to then move to the next step, which is how, through the very structures you have, through the resources you've already got, by a reallocation, a reorientation of them, you can make them so much more effective. And that's what we're here to help. And for those of you who are just interested or possibly thinking about that, do let us know. You'll see the timetable later on. There is a lot of space. We are aiming to have most of the plans announced by next April. But if your plan is going to take till 2023, as the Church of England or the major Jewish environmental group Hazon is going to do, we're not expecting a full plan by the summer. Some will be able to produce it by then, but others certainly won't. But again, we will explore that as we go deeper. So we hope this will be a useful window in how to do this. And the aim now, and Susie is going to moderate this, the aim now is really to say to you, if you've got any sort of immediate questions, and I can see 4 things down there at the moment, so I'll ask Susie to help us. We would like to hear from you. You will also have just been sent a quick poll. There are 3 polls through the sessions, and if you can just answer this very simply, this will help us to understand the scope and scale of what we've got. So do please answer that. And there will be a second question and answer session, which will involve Gopal as well. So that comes towards the end, as well as Nana and Alison. So more general questions as a result of what you hear later, you can ask again. But just now, if there are any immediate issues, Susie, over to you as to whether we've got anything that needs an answer or a response.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we've had a few questions in the Q&A session, and again, if you've got any more, do add. The first one, Martin, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but perhaps you could go into a bit more detail. What is the timeline for the Faith long-term plans? Could you give a bit more detail on that?
Okay, we do go into this a little bit later on, but essentially we're asking for commitments by the end of the year, so that we know who's on board. We've already got, I think it's over 70 groups have signed up, which is more than we did the first time round. And we've just done a big webinar with Religions for Peace, which we think will bring in more. Gopal is also bringing in other networks. We then would ask if you're able to have a draft, a very rough draft, by the end of the spring, early summer. And then the idea would be to help you to fine tune that, to develop it deeper, so that we have a formal plan really by September, which then means that we can report, we can say to the COP26, look, you know, even if you lot aren't going to do much, we are as faiths, and be nice if the national governments joined us, but we will be doing it anyway. But as I said, there is no absolute fixed timetable. What we would love to know by the end of this year is that you want to do one, even if you know, given often the way in which faiths are structured, that it will take time to set up a working group, to then report to the major decision-making structure, and then from the decision-making structure to take out soundings. We know that faiths move sometimes quite slowly, but when they do move, they move. So we are not setting a cutoff point, other than that we would like to have these programs up and running really by 2023, 2024, so that we're making a significant impact on the SDGs.
Okay, and then we've got another question. How can we work collectively together on the plans? And Imam Kasozi from Uganda, very nice to have you on the webinar, Imam Kasozi, has also made a comment, which is that by sharing experiences in different parts of the world and trying to share best practices, particularly those groups that have already done some work on this could share the experiences and challenges they met in implementing their projects, and also by looking at what the reaction of communities has been to the work that's been done. So I don't know if anyone would like to add any more to that. how can we work collectively together on the plans?
I think I'm going to ask Alison to comment in on that one.
Hello, everybody. Yes, how can we work collectively on the plans? There's an intention, once we have a good sense of what the issues of key concern to groups are, to create these thematic working groups going forward, so that we have a collective framework for groups that might be separated or be distinct by tradition or by geography, but have a shared interest in the same issue, for example, water, habitat protection, forestry, etc., to create a framework for them to interact and to deliver on their plans together. I'll talk a bit more about this, so I won't spoil the surprise there, but that's how we hope they can work together.
Thank you.
A couple of other plans. What if we can't complete our plans fit with your timetable? I think you've already answered that, haven't you, Martin? Also, what if our plan is not for the next 10 years, but for a shorter time frame?
Well, no problem with that either, because in a sense, what we're asking for is an alignment of faith assets with the environmental and sustainable goals. The objective, very much as Pope Francis has put it in Laudate Si, of our responding to hearing the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. So no, 2030 is obviously a UN deadline. It's the end of the Sustainable Development Goals. There will be something new coming up. No, if it makes more sense within your context to move in a shorter time frame in order that something happens, please, we're here to help you do that as well. All we need to know is that you are doing that, so that we can, is exactly as Alison said, we can collectively bring together. So already those working on the faith finance side, we have FaithInvest, and we have Nana with her membership program rolling out. What we're looking to do essentially is to set up sort of support groups that will help you on particular topics. But no, there is no time constraints. If you want to make a plan that lasts till 2040, or as the Church of Sweden put it splendidly whenever they discuss their investment policy, we invest for eternity, you're very welcome. And if you want to make it shorter, because actually that fits with a goal, a set of goals you've already got that become perhaps more focused as a result of engagement with the faith long-term plans, that's absolutely fabulous too.
Dave Bookless has a question. Are the plans for faith-based NGOs or only for worshipping communities or equivalent? And I think we can say very clearly the answer is yes to NGOs, absolutely. We have another question. Are we required to develop plans that cover all 7 key areas in the Faith Long-Term Plans programme?
No, not at all. And again, Alison will explore that shortly. No, not at all. Those 7 areas are generic. We know that if you look at all the faiths, there are some of them that are very heavily invested in all 7 of those areas. But no, what we want you to do is build on your strengths. Essentially, the faith long-term plans are about you looking at what you're best at, where you have stakeholder power, where you have authority, where you are trusted, where you can move resources, and saying, we are going to do this. This will be our focal point. And I think, Gopal will speak to this, I suspect, what you'll find is that if you focus on 2 or 3 and get really deep into those, often some of the others follow as a sort of follow-on or a consequence of that. So no, concentrate on your strengths. So if I was to take a very simple example, the Taoists of China, who have already done work on their next long-term plan, they created one in 2009, their major focus is on rural communities, because that's where their greatest strength is. And their major contribution is on the whole area of traditional Chinese medicine, and on essentially creating a counterculture to the hectic speed of which China is changing. So for example, they've already built 2 Taoist designed towns to show what a Taoist town would look like. In other words, a place that is for nature, a place for rest, for reflection, for meditation. So that will be their focus, but other things come out of that. So focus on what you're good at what you know you can do, and we'll help you with that. And then through the cross-fertilization that's been asked for, I think you'll find that all sorts of other things will begin to emerge.
Chris Philpott from Leamington Spa in the UK is asking what Buddhist organisations are involved. He's a member of the Soto Zen tradition, based at Throstle Hole Monastery.
Oh, yes.
If you want to answer that
very
now?
well, very well, very well indeed. I mean, just to give you a flavour, so we have the major Sri Lankan Buddhist Development Agency, the name of which I can never remember, Sarabodja. I normally rely on my colleague Pippa, who is hiding at the moment and not visible, but we have that. And that's a very fascinating one because, of course, they have a development bank. We're working with Sokogakai in Japan. They are exploring becoming involved with this. We're working with the Chinese Buddhist Association. We also have projects in Cambodia. We have commitments from Cambodia and from Thailand, particularly from the forest monk traditions, and from Ladakh as well. So those are the key ones that I can think of at the moment. But I hope that gives you a sense of, oh, and I'm so sorry, and also here in the UK, Amavatri, the Thai forest monastery in Hemel Hempstead with their wonderful Thai forest down in Sussex.
Shernaz Karma is asking, can we develop on the issues we raised in Salisbury, etc.? For example, water.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And how nice to be in touch with again. That was a long time ago, but as you may know, ARC, funded and supported by the Valley Foundation, who I know are also listening, was able to develop a whole program around water. And Susie is in fact one of the key staff on Faith in Water, which is a project that's been working particularly in Uganda on water issues. Absolutely, because that's where, and Alison again will touch on this, that's where the working groups are going to be so important. Because what we want to be able to do is to bring together all the faith groups that then say, well, water is a major priority for us, either because we want to invest in sustainable water, or through our schools, which is the work that Susie has been pioneering. We want to focus on providing clean water and facilities, particularly for young girls in the school who otherwise don't come to school. All those sort of issues. Absolutely, absolutely. If you have a pressing concern, we ask you to talk about, to plan on how you will engage with that structurally and invest in that, and then we can link you up with others. But I think, Alison, we've already been discussing that water and energy, food, forests are very likely to be major working groups.
Now, another question, is there a list of organisations that have committed or are committing to develop a plan so far in order to be able to work with them together, or at least have an exchange with them?
We have a list. It's our list at the moment because we're still having people join. As I say, I think we're just over 70 groups at the moment. We have to, of course, be very careful about the whole issue of data protection and so forth. But certainly, my assumption would be that we would be putting something up probably by the end of the month, once we've heard from you and we've heard from some of the other groups we're talking to. It is constantly growing, which is extremely exciting and very gratifying. We anticipate it could be as many as 200, but bear with us for the moment because we are still collecting information. But yes, we'll make that available so that you can see who else is out there, who else in your region is out there, never mind within your own faith tradition, but also within your own faith tradition.
Then we have a question from another old friend of ARC's, Metropolitan Seraphim Kikotis, from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria and all Africa, who says that many ecological activities of faith groups need sort of support to improve their activities. And he's wondering if there's any plan by FaithInvest to organise some seminars in order to enable faith communities to improve their ecological ministry.
Well, Metropolitan, first of all, congratulations on the book that you've just co-authored as part of the Anglican Orthodox panel on the environment, which I believe came out this week. really fascinating, and congratulations on that. In a sense, the Faith long-term plans are precisely that, I think, Bishop. They are designed exactly to move us to the next level. They are designed to create partnerships with secular agencies that can bring in expertise and potentially even funding. I mean, we are in a very interesting discussion at the moment that Alison and I are involved with the possibility of some of the more traditional national development agencies actually beginning to work with Faith. And in fact, Susie has been unique in having got, I think now, 3 grants from the British Development Agency, which I think is a record actually. So yes, part of this, to put it mildly, is putting the faiths on the scene, is actually saying to groups, as we've done with the World Resources Institute, you aren't working with faith? Why on earth not? We're the largest civil society structure in the world. 80% of people claim to belong to one of our faiths. We are major stakeholders. We are trusted. We are influential. And if you're looking for sustainability, well, we've been around a hell of a long time, and we intend to be around for a very long time. We know a little bit about how surviving crises, because we've been going through quite a lot of them in the last 2,000 to 4,000 years. So yes, we are looking, we know that you need resources, you need information, you need best practice, you need knowledge, you need data, you need scientific basis for many of these things. And that's what we're building, a foundation for that.
I think also, Martin, it just might be worth also mentioning all the webinars under the different topics that we've got planned over the next 2 to 3 months, which
Absolutely.
will specifically go into individual topics.
Yes, exactly. Those, and again, Alison will be putting those up when we get to the practical section of this. But yes, we are planning deep dive into key areas. So I hope that will be sufficient. But Susie, I think we probably ought to allow Gopal his time, unless there's a really pressing final question.
There are 2 questions. I'll just quickly mention them. What support is offered by FaithInvest in developing the plans? How can I access resources for the long-term plans? And I think, Alison, you'll be talking about that in more detail, won't you? So perhaps we'll hold off answering that one. And then, does the plan have to be done at the level of the denomination, or can a denominational entity or single congregation produce and submit a plan?
Very good question. I think the answer is yes, but I would suggest that we will be very stretched if every local temple, church, synagogue, mosque decided to do a single plan in terms of just being able to answer you all. So we are looking at more collective structures. One thing is, yes, please start locally, but see whether other people of your own tradition are involved and would like to be involved. Bring that forward to the national or regional structure and say, look, we are doing this already. Can it come under your umbrella? Religions for Peace are also looking at setting up hubs, regional hubs, which would mean that you could go through that system. We welcome it, but bear in mind, we are a fairly small group. So the larger you can collect together, a larger group you can collect together, the better. You know, if you're in an ecumenical parish, for instance, in a church setting, well, work with all the churches and then see whether, as you get going, you can say to others, look, we're doing this. Would you like to join us? It would be really good. The bigger, the better, but we don't want to lose that intensity that can come from a really committed local community. So Alison, sorry, Gopal, can we open up now to you for sharing your experience of having done this in the past and the consequences. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's a real pleasure to be here. And like you said, I've done this work now for over 10 years, and I really wouldn't be doing this work if it wasn't for the invitation in late 2008, 2009 to be involved with creating the Hindu long-term plan. I'd like to share my screen if I can. Hopefully that will work. So my name is Gopal. I serve as a new NGO called Boomi Global, and I'll explain how that came about. And I'm currently based here in New York City, but originally from glorious Northwest London, a town called Watford. I know it's very dear in the hearts of Martin and many other people as well. So back in 2008, 2009, then the Alliance of Religions and Conservation approached the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, where I was working, and asked us if we would develop the Hindu long-term plan, which was going to be launched with the other long-term plans in the lead up to the Copenhagen COP in 2009. And we took on that responsibility because the environment was something very much on our radar at the Oxford Centre, and we felt that it was something that Hindu communities across the UK and globally could contribute to. So what we did, we really took a broad approach in doing this, recognizing that we were an academic institution, that we needed to work with the leaders and the activists within the Hindu community across the United Kingdom. And so we convened, with the support of ARC, a number of meetings over the course of 2009, from about May through to September. I think we had 6 national meetings at Hindu temples across the United Kingdom, ensuring that there was various perspectives and traditions that were reflected in the development of the long-term plan. Because we weren't developing a plan just for one Hindu tradition, but we were developing an umbrella Hindu plan that reflected and represented a variety of Hindu traditions. And that was intentional, so that if we developed a meta plan, then denominations within Hinduism could then go forward and take inspiration from the larger plan and see how they can tailor that towards their own specific tradition and community. So we had a group of about 6 or 7 people from across the UK from different Hindu temples. And that ensured there was buy-in from a very early stage in the development of the plan. As I mentioned, we had meetings at different Hindu temples across the United Kingdom. And this also ensured that there were shared responsibilities, that the heavy lifting wasn't just on us at the Oxford Centre and the small team that we had, but the different temples and the different Hindu denominations who were involved really felt like they had ownership of the process, and then eventually ownership of the plan itself. So the shared responsibilities aspect of this was very critical, in addition to ensuring there was broad representation in the development. And what we found when we launched the plan, and the photograph you see on the screen is from the launch back in 2009, that was the core drafting team, is that we put our plan into 3 separate sections. And we really did that because we drew from Hinduism to understand, if we want to move people into action, what are the foundations we need to put in place before people are ready to act? And we really felt that partnerships and education need to be part of the plan, in addition to the actual practical things that we want our partners and communities to be doing. So our plan was in partnerships, education, and action. And as I mentioned, the development of the plan took about 6 to 7 months over the course of 2009 and was launched at Windsor Castle. Since the launch of the plan, we were still in existence and we're still around. And we've been amazed at just the platform, the plan, and the network has allowed and facilitated in order for us to expand our work over the past 10 years. And we're now doing work which 10 years ago, when we were developing the plan, we really didn't know was going to be possible. For example, we've really established ourselves now as the leading Hindu voice on climate change, biodiversity, and sustainable development. Now we are approached by entities like the United Nations and similar bodies for advice, for guidance in terms of how to engage Hindu groups on these issues. We've been able to mobilize thousands of people across the world, tens of thousands in India, across the United Kingdom, and here in the United States as well. Again, from a broad cross-section of Hindu groups and communities. And as I mentioned, our plan has inspired action within other Hindu organizations. Hindu groups have seen our plan, which was broad and vast, and felt like they wanted to take that as a template to see what they can do within their own communities and own traditions. So we've inspired action within other Hindu organizations. But something that we didn't anticipate, which is really exciting to see, is that we've inspired the creation of new Hindu environmental programs that sit outside existing Hindu structures. And so a new group has just been formed in the UK. There are some groups here in the US who are really excited about what we've done and felt like they wanted to create something new. So that's really exciting, that not just working within the institutions, but outside as well, we've been able to create new bodies and organizations. And as I mentioned at the top, we started this work within the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies as our home And really what's happened over the last 10 years is as the project has grown, we recently realized that the project needed a new legal entity, a new standing. And so we started a new nonprofit very recently called Boomi Global, just recently registered earlier this summer. And that's because the work has grown so much that it's grown outside of the remit of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, and now is positioned in a place to stand on its own 2 feet in legally and financially to really do the work for the next decade and beyond. And so that's for us, a really great sign of success, that being housed within a parent organization for 10 years, supported by ARC and other institutions. And now we've got to the point where we can go out on our own, bring in our own board and advisors. Some of the lessons that we learned, and if we could go back and do it all again, these are some of the things that we would maybe reconsider or pay a bit more attention to. One thing is that we really didn't have a mechanism to maintain engagement with our founding members. And that's something we really wish we did, because there was a lot of buy-in at the early stages, but we just didn't have the processes and the procedures to ensure that the founding members continued that buy-in through our journey of growth. As I said, we have leveraged the networks and the connections that the long-term plans created for us, but there's certainly more that we could have done. For example, this photograph here was a meeting that Christiana Figueres' office reached out to us for, asking for a meeting with climate activists in India a couple of years ago. And it was that point when I realized that if someone like Christiana Figueres and the UNFCCC are seeing us as a key stakeholder and as a key convener, there are probably many more networks and connections that we could establish. And so that's just something we didn't really take advantage of. For example, we didn't stay in touch with the authors of other long-term plans from other religious traditions as much as that we should have or could have. One really key thing that we didn't put in our initial plan was a budget, a funding plan, and what kind of resources we would need to implement them. We had a plan, it was great, but we didn't have any idea how it was going to be funded. We didn't have any idea how many people would be needed to implement it. And I think that was a key critical component that we missed the first time around. And coupled with that, we had a plan, but we didn't have a strategy with goals and timelines. We had a collection of really great ideas, but we didn't lay them out in saying, this is what we're going to do first, this is what we're going to do second, and so on. So we didn't have a strategy in that sense. And we didn't really know what success was going to look like with specific goals and timelines. And so that's something that we would, if we could go back, that's something we would do. Finally, to finish off my remarks, just recapping some of the benefits that we found by being part of the long-term plan process back in 2009 and working on it over the last 10 years, is that it really gave us an opportunity to understand the lay of the land within the Hindu community around what Hindus globally were doing. And that was really important because we wanted to build on the success and honor those people who have been doing work. It also allowed us an opportunity to dive deep into the history of Hinduism, the theology, and the contemporary practice of the tradition as well, because we really felt that the plan had to be a Hindu plan. It couldn't just be a secular plan with the Hindu label added onto it, but really it had to reflect the sensitivities, the cultural nuances of the tradition and the communities it was aiming to represent. It allowed us to foster and establish very excellent and amazing partnerships across the world. And that was a huge benefit of the plan and being part of the network. And the plan also showed our commitment and willingness to act. That when other people approached us, we could show them a document that was a consultative process and showed that we were willing to engage on the issues. And finally, the plan was an excellent guiding document. Whenever we got lost, whenever we felt like we didn't know what to do next, we could always refer back to our 9-year plan and say, well, this is what we agreed in 2009. And the wisdom and the experience that went into drafting that plan is still relevant now. And even now, 10 years on, we still look back at that plan to determine what to do going forward. So overall, it's been a fantastic process in terms of the 2009 year of developing the plan, and then the 10+ years after of implementing it, sharing it with others, and asking others to be part of the process as well. So that's how we did it. Over to you, Martin.
Gopal, thank you very much indeed. So Alison and I will now take you through what constitutes, as it were, a long-term plan. Some of you may know I'm a China scholar, particularly Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism, and translate those texts. And many, many, many years ago, I came across a wonderful phrase in the writings of Confucius. First practice what you want to preach, and then preach about what you want to practice. In other words, we've been seen by the outside world largely as a preaching community. You know, every so often we will be asked by something like, people putting pressure on the G20 or a COP, will the faith leaders of the world sign a letter and tell everybody what to do? The trouble is, if we're not doing it ourselves, on what basis would anybody want to pay any attention? And moreover, that has led us to this belief that we're marginal, that the most we can do is wag a finger or shout from the edge or demand that they do something that perhaps we haven't actually done ourselves. So the basis of the faith long-term plans is that we will put into practice what it is that we want other people to do. And we can only ask them to do that if we have already made those commitments. And so the faith long-term plans are about us taking our place amongst the most powerful forces on the planet. Very simple example. The Catholic Church has more schools than the United States and Canada combined. So why on earth, when you're talking about education, would you not involve the faiths? And yet until about 6 years ago, UNICEF, the major UN agency working with children, had no formal relationship whatsoever with the world's faiths. And it was one of the great successes, I think, of ARC and our faith colleagues that we actually got them, first of all, to look at what they were already doing. And to their astonishment, they discovered that most of their national offices were working with the faiths anyway, because how else was anything going to happen? But they had never officially given permission or encouragement for that to happen. That has now changed quite dramatically. And the WASH program, Water in the Schools and Health and Sanitation, is a good example of that. There is now a major faith component. So first practice what you want to preach, and then preach about what you want to practice. Over to you, Alison.
Thanks, Martin. So you've all actually done an extremely good job of asking lots of the questions that that I'm about to try and go into more detail on. So don't forget that there is another opportunity to pick up on anything that either hasn't been addressed in the first Q&A or that I don't address now. So we're getting into the part now where we think about how you can actually create a plan. We, as Martin has alluded to, want the driving ethos behind these plans to be your faith tradition. This is not a process that is externally imposed, and it can and will only have the impact it deserves to have if your plans arise from your faith traditions. That said, we recognise that a blank sheet of paper can be quite intimidating sometimes. So with that in mind, we've created a suggested framework. There are 7 key areas, and we break them down into sort of more detailed categories. The first on the list is that faith consistent use of assets. Within this, we categorise assets as everything from construction and buildings, land and forests, water, wildlife habitat protection, healthcare, purchasing and consumption. And I know Martin wanted to talk a little bit about the financial assets component of that.
We will go into this in more detail through Nana's presentation, but I think it is this sense that we actually own quite a lot of the planet. The faiths own about 8% of the habitable surface of the planet, but a further 15% is considered sacred and is often protected simply because there is a temple or a church or a mosque or a special holy place in the midst of that. So when you're thinking about assets, the investments, which Nana will take us into later, is a huge one, a vast one. But so is the fact that you own land. And in many countries, the only surviving place where indigenous plants, trees, often species, flora and fauna generally, survive is around religious buildings, because you tend not to plough or hunt around churchyards or around sacred places. So think very broadly about that. We protect an enormous amount by accident, simply because it's taken shelter under the aegis of our religious buildings and under the control or under the influence of our land that we hold around our sacred places. Back to you, Alison.
Thanks, Martin. So just doing a quick whiz round these other sections, we've got education in young people. That's a reminder to you to think, as Martin just said, broadly. Think beyond schools, think about your youth camps, think about informal education, think about vocational training and entrepreneurship. There's lots of different ways in which faiths offer education and engage with young people. And this broad thinking is very much what we're trying to encourage you to do by setting out these frameworks, is to help you to think beyond perhaps your assets as simply your places of worship or areas in which you have direct control. We have other areas, including wisdom. So within wisdom, we're looking at theological education, training, but also, sadly, very much around what faiths can offer in terms of crisis and adaptation. How can faiths support those in the world who are bearing the brunt of climate-induced disasters? And how can our theologies speak to us as we learn to adapt to our changing world? Within lifestyles, we're talking about the obvious aspects of how we live our lives, but also trying to draw out the traditions of faiths who speak to simple living. We're also thinking about the less obvious aspects of our lifestyle, which includes pilgrimage. Media and advocacy is something that, again, often gets forgotten. Many faith traditions own entire TV stations, newspapers, media outlets. And within that advocacy, there is an enormous potential for influence. And I know that this is this media aspect that Martin wanted to pick up on.
Yes, we often forget that we have enormous media networks. There are literally thousands of radio stations run by the major faiths. There are over 1,000 television stations and networks run by the major faiths. We're also quite good, I think, particularly in the Sikh community, amazingly good at using websites, have been doing this for many years, and it was one of the foundation elements of the Eco-Sikh plan that grew out of the Sikh long-term plan back in 2009, was to really make a use of reaching out to people. So that's enormously influential. And I think advocacy is fascinating. Again, we underestimate ourselves. A very simple story from a few years ago, before the long-term plans, but it's one of my favorites. And this was that the United Methodist Church of the United States, about 10 million members, produce weekly leaflets in their churches. And they decided around about 2002, 2003, that they would only use sustainable paper. So they went to the major suppliers in each of their cities and towns that they were based in, which was a well-known company. And they said, we want the best environmental paper, please. And the company everywhere said, oh, there isn't a demand. So they stopped using that supplier and wrote to the head of the company and said, we're not using you because actually we want you to provide us with the most environmentally sensitive paper. And when it was revealed that the United Methodist Church uses more paper than the whole of Sweden, the company within a month brought in a range of 6 different environmental papers to be used. Now, that's a good example of your purchasing power and your advocacy.
Thanks, Martin. I'm going to move on to Martin's favourite bit, which is celebration, before asking him to give an example on partnerships. Celebration is hugely important in all of this because, as Gopal alluded to in his presentation, you need to get people to buy into this process. That's something that Bhumi did really well with stakeholder consultation right at the beginning. But one way of sharing faith's positions on nature is to share a celebration and find some way of marking the occasion. Something that has been hugely successful for the Sikh community has been this March the 14th Environment Day that has provided a really effective rallying point for Sikhs to express their responsibility to nature and get stuck into some practical projects. We know that there are more and more opportunities for this coming up, and I will touch on this when we look at the timeline, as to when we're suggesting that you might be able to come up with some sort of faith celebration, so that it chimes in with, for example, the Christian Church, the season of Creation Tide, and Climate Sunday and other opportunities like that. Partnerships, again, are hugely important. I'm really pleased to have seen that a lot of this came up in the questions at the beginning, and it's really heartening to see that so many of you see this as a process whereby you can engage with other like-minded groups. Partnerships between the faiths is really important, but also partnerships outside. I'll be talking a bit more about that with technical partnerships on offer, but I know that Martin had an example that he wanted to talk to.
Yes, I think the interesting thing about partnerships is that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are many groups out there with vast experience, vast knowledge that they can bring to us, and that we can then provide a real way of putting forward. And one of the most successful partnerships, I think, was with the Forest Stewardship Council, the FSC, the best environmental program on forestry that has ever come into existence. It's still got flaws, but it is definitely the best that we have. And we brought together the major forest owning faiths about 10 years ago to look at how they could put their commercial forests under FSC and therefore receive the highest environmental standard possible. And it was a total revelation to the Forest Stewardship Council that 5% of the commercial forests of the world were owned by the faiths. So it was a partnership that they had never thought of, and it was a partnership that the faiths who run forests had never thought of. It moved the FSC forward, and it also led to the fact that most faiths now, if they're rebuilding or buying furniture or what have you, will go for FSC paper, FSC wood, FSC facilities.
Thanks, Martin. So let's have a think about how this is all going to roll out. Again, you've all done you've made my job so much easier by asking such great questions. And certainly amongst those questions was, hang on a second, what if this time frame doesn't work for us? And the resounding response is, that's okay. This is, as I will keep repeating, a program that is intended to facilitate your response. This is not something that we want you to contort to participate in. What we want to facilitate is the most impactful programs that you can create. And if that means that you can't do it for 18 months or further, that's okay too. It's about getting the best results rather than fitting into a framework. That said, we do still need some sort of a process to keep this thing rolling on. So I'm just going to give you a little idea of how we see the next 18 months rolling out. So right now we're in autumn at the moment. Here in the UK, it's very autumnal. We have red leaves and blowing outside my window, and I don't know what it's like around the world where you are. At the moment, we're asking people to commit to making a plan, discuss this, think about it. Who can take this forward, and what partnerships might you need? Moving forward, we will be sharing details with you on specific webinars. We recognise that the 7 key areas are vast, and again, whilst not all of you will want to cover all of those areas, they still have great potential within them. So we will be offering a series of 10 webinars between now and early spring next year that really go into a lot more detail in each of those areas, and we'll be sharing those details and dates with you very shortly. We're hoping that you will, over this time, start to design a plan, and whilst you're designing that plan, have a think about what help you need. We will talk again in more detail later on about some of the assistance that is available to you, but it's really important that you don't restrict yourself to the expertise that you might have within your own tradition. We want these plans to speak to your tradition, but you don't have to be wholly responsible for delivering them yourselves. This moves through to spring summer 2021, where we are hoping you will share a draft of your plan. And this will give us an opportunity to think whether there are ways in which we can help you find external input that you might not have thought of, and also to help you think about whether these are deliverable. We've had a really helpful input from Gopal about lessons that they learned from Bhumi about perhaps being great on vision and perhaps slightly less clear on their implementation. And we're just seeing this as a sort of a checkpoint to help you think about whether these are as deliverable as they can be. Tommy raised he raised a comment in the first Q&A sessions about whether these will be externally monitored. And the answer is no, we're not looking to create formal assessment processes for them. But what we are looking for is to make sure that you have the capacity to monitor and evaluate your own plans and to make sure that they are as deliverable and impactful as possible. That rolls through to summer, autumn 2021, where we hope to have collected a good bunch of plans. Again, reiterate the point that not everybody will have a final plan by this point, and that's okay. But we will have a good sense of the scale and scope of the plans. We are deliberately doing this well in advance of the Glasgow COP because we want to take advantage of as many external, internally advocacy opportunities as possible. And we also want to encourage you to mark this in some way. If you've created a plan, how are you sharing this within your faith tradition? How are you bringing your community on board with this plan? There's a rather large gap then between November 2021 and 2030, where we have the delivery of the SDGs. But I just wanted to sort of pick up on the point of what happens in between then and now and then. Firstly, these plans will be carried out, and we know from the first process and from what is going on within faith traditions around the world, the impact that they can have. We've already mentioned the possibilities for thematic working groups. We are already clear in our minds that there are some emerging topics around which we want to create frameworks to support groups working on them. Martin mentioned forestry, water, and energy, and some others. We were looking to create these working groups, but we are also open to the fact that we may need to look for new structures, initiatives, and partnerships. This is very much intended to be a responsive process to your needs. So there are a few question marks there, simply because we want to know what it is needed before we can deliver it. Martin, you wanted to pick up on this point of being ambitious.
Yes, this is a picture from Uganda of something that came out of one of the African long-term plans, which is the creation of Green Friday in the mosques across Uganda, where tree planting is now a fundamental element of what happens on a Green Friday at mosques. It was enormously ambitious. It was driven very much by their long-term plan, by the Muslim Union of Uganda's long-term plan, the Ugandan Muslim Supreme Council, but then also driven by some people just saying, come on, let's really think big. And we would encourage you to really think big. We are the most trusted sector of civil society. If we ask people to do things, they're often so delighted. They're usually so delighted to be asked and to play a role. Let's get people enthusiastic. Let's get them excited about the relevance of their faith. One of the things that we have noticed is that the environment and faith for young people makes it possible for them to see that faith might actually be something worth working with. And you're not alone. We already have these partners and others are lining up. We are also working with the United Nations Environment. We're working with UNDP. The involvement in the COP in Glasgow is at the specific invitation of the British government. There are other groups lining up to join in. So if you know of groups that you're working with who you think could make a contribution to this overall program, not just from the faith side, but from the secular side, let us know. There are enormous resources out there. And in many cases, when we go to certain groups like Trillion Trees or World Resources Institute, they're just absolutely stunned that they hadn't thought of working with the faiths in the first place. So join us in an amazing array of skills, knowledge, information, enthusiasm, commitment, and depth. That's what Faith Long-Term Plans are really all about. Now I'm going to ask my colleague, Nana Francois, who is the Director of Membership for FaithInvest, to explain particularly about that dimension, because this is already one of the areas, and we have on the call some people who've been deeply instrumental through the Development Committee and support in helping create FaithInvest. Wonderful to see you on. But Nana will now take you into how this works. Here's an example, if you like, of what can be done with a resource which really until quite recently was operating very much solo within each faith and very much sort of on a kind of, well, we'll see how it goes. So Nana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you everybody who's attending this webinar for your patience and for asking all of the good questions which are helping to really get to the bottom of how we can create plans that will really make a change. So FaithInvest is really happy to be a key partner on this program, because financial investments are a really important way in which the faiths can proactively do good for people and planet. We really are about shifting capital to do good, and we aim to do that by building bridges within faith traditions, so that's often between the faith leaders and the investment professionals. Also then between the different faiths, different groups within the same faith tradition and different traditions as well. And then also from the faiths to the wider secular world, very much with the view that we really aim to be implementers and to be deliverers. So you go from your plan to your implementation, which actually shifts the capital and makes the change. In that context, it was really good to hear Gopal mention the plans as an important guiding document. We do think it's very key to have a guiding document. Quite often financial investments are seen as one of the hardest places in which to move a faith organization. So if you galvanize all the key people together, have a guiding document that everybody can work to, and have a document that you can take out to the wider world, it really helps along that journey. And in terms of where we would encourage people to start, maybe the first thing I'll say is that this is a short introduction, and there will be another webinar in a few weeks' time where we will dig into detail as to how to create your investments financial plan. But the starting place for everyone really is to just take stock of where you are and what you have. Taking stock is about looking at your current investments, but it's also about looking at the current projects that you support and considering whether they could be potentially converted into something that becomes more sustainable and therefore another sort of investment. And I will just flag that next week, I think already, there is a FaithInvest webinar on green entrepreneurship, which really helps you to work through that particular journey. So you're taking stock of your investments, taking stock of the projects you support, and then also taking stock of the people who you have put in charge of those things. So understanding, is your investment committee and your leaders, are they fully familiar and equipped and able to carry forward any plans that you want to take through? Having taken stock, it's then about imagining and planning the future. One of the key things we ask people to do at FaithInvest is to start with guidelines, investment guidelines that start from your faith tradition and use that to drive what you proactively want to do. I think the point has been made by all of us that this is about being deeply embedded in our faiths and not adding faith as an add-on after you've made a certain financial decision. And that's something we really want to reiterate inside FaithInvest. So it's about making those plans and then working out who's going to help you to implement. How are you going to use the professionals to help you to implement? How are you going to use partners like FaithInvest to help you to implement? And how are you going to use the broader community and the working groups that will evolve out of the creation of the plans? And finally, but also importantly, it's about sharing and celebrating what does work and what is working. Often with financial investments, they seem intimidating until you meet another group who has gone a certain way of the journey, or another group who has the same challenge that you have and who would like to get together and talk about it, and not just talk about it, but actually solve and break down some of the barriers to allow you to make progress. So in a nutshell, that's the process for creating a faith long-term plan from an investment perspective. And I hope that many of you will join us in a few weeks' time when we delve into this in more detail.
Thank you very much indeed, Nana. And Nana is one of our key colleagues running this whole program on membership, but also one of our key colleagues who has seen the light and left the world of capitalist growth and expansion in order to come and do good. Not that you weren't doing good before, Nana, I have to say that. But we do actually have, one of the great things that we have in FaithInvest is a team that has had an enormous experience in pretty much every sector of the investment world, and Nana heads that team. So this isn't just about, wouldn't it be nice? This is about how do you actually do it? So thank you very much indeed for that. Let me just tell you one other story. In 2008, we wrote out and contacted many, many different religious organizations, and through various connections we had, we approached the Jesuit movement worldwide. And they, to our delight, agreed that they would set up a working committee to design a Jesuit long-term plan. About a year and a half ago, and it was a very, very good plan, and they have implemented a great deal of this, and we in fact work with them very closely in FaithInvest as a major partner. But about a year and a half ago, I was at the Vatican and someone came up to me and said, oh, yeah, Martin, I've always wanted to tell you how wonderful it was to be a member of the Jesuit working group that created the Faith Long-Term Plan. I said, well, it's a very good plan, thank you. And this woman said, and do you know who one of the 10 members was? I said, no, you didn't tell us anything. She said, the current Pope. And that was the first time that the Pope had ever actually explored the relationship between religion, theology, and the environment. So in a very small way, because he is a man of extraordinary vision anyway, the long-term plan did contribute towards the impetus for this Pope to create the first ever environmental encyclical of the Catholic Church. And we know what sort of impact that has had. So Susie, I think we're asking you to moderate this for us again in terms of, first of all, if anybody has a story of what they have done that they'd like to share, or questions that they now wish to ask. We have about another 20 minutes maximum, but we would love to switch that number who are already doing a plan round with all those of you who aren't doing a plan yet, so that we have all of you engaged in one way or another. And we are here as a team to be approached, to be asked. There are the webinars. And if we know, as I say, if we know by the end of the year whether this is something you now want to do and you've had the chance to discuss it internally, we'd be very grateful. But Susie, excuse me, over to you and to what kind of input we're getting.
Well, I have a question to ask the participants. If anyone would like to ask any questions specifically, or if you would like to share any of your experience from developing a plan before, please raise your hand and we will unmute you and enable you to do so. In the meantime, Martin, we had a question about whether from Jordanos, I do apologize, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing this correctly, Jordanos Asnaki, who asked, can we do the plan not in 7 areas because water and forest is our experience?
Absolutely. We've been stressing this, I hope, all the way through. The 7 areas are, as it were, the grand map of how and in what way faiths are active in the world and have an enormous influence. But not everybody does, far from it. So that what we want you to focus on is what you're already good at. And that's a wonderful example. If that's your main area, then look at that. But then perhaps once you've focused in on water and forest, think about whether the way in which you invest could be used to influence water policy and water provision for people. The way in which you do your youth work, whether that could have a specific focus. They could perhaps have work camps that work on these issues. Look at the area in which a celebration. Do you have within your faith a time when you think about water especially? For example, and Gopal may be able to speak on something of this, we've recently been involved with a wonderful project called the Durga Opera, a new opera created by a Hindu organization to celebrate the story of Durga and the waters as a way of helping people through drama, through music, through dance, through singing, to engage with a deep and very profound level of story and narrative and imagery within Hinduism. Gopal, do you want to just say something about that initiative?
Yeah, it's a great program. And, what's really great about the long-term plans is that it allows for different actors to come up and be innovative and creative. And this Durga opera is actually led by an individual in the United Kingdom, so not from India. And so I think that's really interesting. And I think, we're in the season of Navratri right now. There's 9 nights of worship to the goddess Durga. And so what a program like that does, it really raises awareness of a critical environmental issue, in this case, water, but then connects it to a deity, but then also connects it to a festival as well. And the opera is fantastic, and it's going to be interesting to see how Hindu groups across the UK and globally relate to it and get more engaged with issues around water, specifically in India, where we know the sacred rivers of the Ganges and the Yamuna are considered dead rivers due to the lack of oxygen and the high levels of pollution in those rivers. So this is really a great example of different people in different parts of the world rising up in a creative way to raise issues around issues that affect all of us.
Gopal, thank you very much indeed. And I think one of the things I would stress is that, and you'll find that within, I think, Alison, it's within wisdom, we do recommend that you think about the arts. We as faiths know that almost nobody pays any attention to our sermons. I mean, we just know that, let's be frank. And therefore, what we really know is that people enjoy the music, they enjoy the storytelling, they enjoy the songs, they enjoy the drama, they enjoy the rituals. And it's an enormous gift that we have, that we understand. I think the surveys have shown that words communicate 7% of what we communicate with our bodies and our gestures and our face and so on and so forth. And I think we know that, and yet for some reason we kind of put the arts in a little bit of a box and keep it away. Susie.
We do have another question for Gopal, I'm afraid. Sorry, Gopal, you have to unmute again. But really, it's just you shared earlier in your presentation some of the things that you've learned. But the question really was, if you are starting again from scratch to develop your long-term plan now, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I think I'd probably bring in some business minds to help us think through how would this work in a very real sense, because it was very aspirational. And as I mentioned, there was no real implementation strategy and resourcing allocated to the projects that we said we wanted to do. So I would bring in, not just because we work primarily with activists and religious leaders to develop the plan. I would bring in some people who look at the figures and say, okay, well, that sounds great. How is it actually going to work? Where are you going to get the funding and the resources to do that? So that's what I think we would do differently if we did it again.
And I suppose connected to that, and in relating to another question that was asked earlier about what kind of support could be offered by FaithInvest, what kind of resources might be available. I just wonder, Alison, if you just wanted to reiterate maybe some of the practical assistance you hope that we'll be able to provide to our partners through the involvement of key environmental groups and other groups.
Yes, thanks, Susie. Yes, I mean, it's a really good piece of advice there from Gopal, and I hope we've left you with a sense of that these plans are intended to be for you from your context, but we would urge you to be as clear as you possibly can about delivering them. And part of that delivery is asking for assistance and looking beyond your own resources. Martin mentioned that we are working with some major global NGOs who have technical expertise, and we have sort of opened up and conversations with them and secured agreements that they are willing and able to assist you in your plans in ways that you might need. And it's really up to you to do that thinking first from that position, that starting point of your own theology, to then think, what matters to us? What is right for us from our faith tradition to do right here, right now. And from that position to look wider into what those activities look like. And if you don't feel that you can deliver those activities, ask, tell us, ask for help, see if there's other people who can help. As Gopal pointed out, he could have done with some people who could have injected a little bit more deliverable realism into the Boomi plans. But you know, we're here to help you if you can ask us. I wanted to also ask a question to all of you whilst I've got you here to ask, and that's around the thematic working groups. This is very much something that is designed to be responsive to you. This is a framework that we hope to create to flex around your needs. Is there anything that you wanted to say now, either in the Q&A or to follow up with me afterwards, in terms of what you imagine might be most helpful? In a session we had yesterday, we heard from a youth leader who was talking about some very practical tree planting programs that they had engaged in. And he gave a really good example of how, with very, very small resources between a number of groups, they could collaborate and create much greater impact. And that's really what we're thinking about with these working groups on a much bigger scale. But again, they're here for you. Please tell us how you would like them to look.
Thank you, Alison. Martin, I think you had something you just wanted to add.
Yes, just I saw there was a question about how do we communicate the commitments, and this is very important. Alison has already alluded to this in the sense that by the time we get to COP26 in Glasgow, we want to have broadcast, we want to have said, look what the faiths are doing. ARC and now FaithInvest has a good relationship with a number of media outlets, particularly with the BBC and such groups, but you all have your networks as well. And we're here also to help. And frankly, although I've been at this now for 35 years, since we did the first meeting in Assisi with WWF in 1986 and the faiths, it's still news to an awful lot of people that the faiths are engaged with the environment. It's extraordinary, but it still is news. So we will help you with the communications as well. We do have partners in the communications world, but that is an area that we can help you with. But the biggest thing you can do is hold a party, hold a celebration. As Alison said, I do like celebrations and parties, but celebrate. Actually say to people, do you know, this Friday, this Saturday, this Sunday, next month at our big festival that always happens at this time of the year, we're going to tell you about how we're going to help save the planet. And we're going to do it through drama, we're going to do it through song, we're going to do it through telling you what's happening, we're going to invite you to be participants. Come and join us. You'll be surprised. The media is always hungry for stories, always. So we can help you make your story really exciting, because it is exciting. That's the heart of it. The fact that this will be, the Faith Long-Term Plans will be the largest single program of faiths acting around the issues of the environment and sustainability that has ever taken place. That's already a story. It's enough of a story that Gopal, as one of the chairs of the UN Multi-Faith Task Force, has been able to bring this into the heart of the UN as something that they would never have known about otherwise, but now they do, and huge excitement there. So in terms of communicating, we can help you do this. You will have all your own networks, but we can also help you raise the level of it by, in a sense, tuning it for a secular world that is desperate for stories of things that might work, who are fascinated by religion and slightly bored about sex scandals, so quite open for something a little more engaging, frankly. So we'll help you.
So thank you. I think we've stunned everyone into silence, Martin, and or at least answered the questions they've had. So that's all from me.
I'll just wrap up by saying, please, if this has awakened an interest in you as a possibility of creating a plan, and I know some of you are out there from foundations and groups, and that you would like and would be interested in helping us resource this, because we know that some groups will need some resource to get those working groups together in order that they can plan. But in the end, this comes down to all of us within each of our own faith traditions, looking at what we've got and saying, what could we do differently that would make an impact? You already have the schools in many cases. You already have the hospitals. You already have the trusted people. You already have the media. You already have the psychological wisdom of having survived thousands of years. It's time that we put this out there side by side, because together we're really going to make a difference. The first round did, and we've already got more plans being committed than we had then. So please join us, contact us, be in touch, let us know how we can help. And we look forward very much indeed to you joining us for the webinars that Pippa has put up. But more importantly, we look forward very much to exploring with you the amazing depths, richness, wisdom, and assets that we all have in our faith. So thank you very much indeed for joining us, and have a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, or a good night, wherever you are. Thank you so much.